We
Is
are
anyone in this chat
online.
feature other than me?
Me. So I'm assuming.
Okay, that's what I say. Are you signed in?
Did it show up on you? Hello, Desi?
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Give me just a moment so I make sure. Yeah, we're live on the webpage. We are live on YouTube. We will be live on Facebook. Facebook takes a minute to load.
Elizabeth Dawn just said, hey, guys.
Welcome, everybody. As you're joining us, we are getting ready for our first Friday night with friends. And we will be starting promptly at 7 p.m. So if you have others that might be interested in our broadcast tonight, go ahead and start sharing that, whether you are on the YouTube platform or on Facebook. You also can watch passively. You'll not be able to chat, but you could watch at newarkupc.info and click on the card entitled Live Beta. And you can then see from there just the video feed and also the chat feed, but you won't be able to actually type in anything in the chat. If you want to do that, you need to go to either Facebook or YouTube, your choice. And we will be starting momentarily. And it looks like it's live. Carolyn has joined us. Good evening, Carolyn. Welcome. Did you know Fiona when you were at UGST, Desi?
I met Fiona via Arash and Meg, but no, I did not take any classes with her, so not at UGST. But welcome, Fiona. Glad you're with us tonight.
You would not have been able to take classes with her. Fiona was one of the early students at UGST.
Oh, was she? I thought she was a contemporary of Meg and Arash.
No, Fiona. Right. I love speaking for people. She's on the live now, and I'm going to tell her story. Right. But Fiona came from Arkansas in the very early years. She was in probably the first 4 or 5 years, and but then relocated to St. Louis and continued education and professional development and job. So,
she said she was in the first class. Now she says she's Fiona, but on Facebook it says Elizabeth Dawn. So
that's correct.
Threw me off. But
that's her
Arash and I. Yeah, Arash and I overlapped by 1 semester.
Yeah, Meg and Fiona would have become friends many years after Fiona graduated when
they
Meg
went to the same church.
That's correct.
Church.
Yep. All right, as folks are gathering in, my count says we've got 11 watching. Obviously, there are many that are thinking it's starting at 7, which it is. So you early adopters, send out the word. Let folks know that we will be starting at 7 p.m. Their choice with regard to either Facebook or YouTube. All right. Now, once we get going, Desi, I am going to mute you and myself.
So it's not just me. I don't need to take it personally.
No.
Or should I take it personally that you're going to mute me?
That's your choice, whether you take it personally or not. I'm going to do it anyway.
Fair enough. I see Becky Cohen joined us and Darlene Lopez as well. Good evening, ladies. Thank you for dialing in.
While we're killing a little bit of time as we draw close to 7 o'clock, let me ask Fiona a question. Did you happen to take the church history class the same time as Dr. Peyton did? I know you took church history, but did you take it at the same time as Dr. Peyton did?
Joey, we lost your video feed.
Yes, my 7 o'clock alarm that was going off notifying me 5 minutes early that I was supposed to be watching Newark just went off, and it wasn't going to quit going off unless I went to it and turned it off.
Gotcha.
So, and because when the alarm's going, it muted you guys.
Ah, yes. Okay. Good evening. Karen joined us as well, and Fiona says she doesn't think so.
Go.
She says we're asking her to remember a class from 20 years ago. Did you take church history with Fiona?
It seems like she was in that class with Marge and I, and yeah, also, I'm pretty sure she was.
Who was the young lady from Colorado also that had known you since you were, that was very protective? Vonell.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And Pasley was in that class.
Does Joey Peyton need protecting?
Well, that's a long story. We won't get into that tonight, but that was back when
protection from them got the teachers.
It was also back when Dr. Peyton had a bad attitude too. He was a absolute punk sitting in my class. But this is a lesson in giving people time and space. Now he's a dear friend, but he was a punk then.
Just misunderstood.
Who? I was, or you were, or both?
I was. Maybe both.
Yeah. I imagine it was both. He just couldn't get his head wrapped around how a punk kid of 27 had anything to teach him.
Well, it didn't help the matter that he looked 11 years old.
That's where my silver's helping me out, isn't it?
I haven't really gotten the silver yet. I'm just losing it, which is unfair because I'd rather have the silver than just go thin. But
yes, I think
not like we have much say in that matter.
Say that again, Peyton.
I said I thank God every day for my silver hair. I don't care how gray it gets up there, just as long as it stays up there.
Yeah, and mine is not staying, which is unfortunate.
I've been noticing that.
Mm-hmm. I have zero control over it, but.
Well, that's what the master said. He says, who of you by taking thought can add to your height or something about the hair? So, I guess we're going to have to leave it in the hands of God, whether you become a bald man.
Mm-hmm.
Given the looks of your father, I think, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I got his hairline. My dad's doing pretty good for an 80-year-old man.
Yeah, but he's thinning. He's thinning some, isn't he?
They're thinning. Oh yeah, he's thinning, but my dad probably has as much hair as I do, and I'm 37 and he's 80, so almost 80.
Well, they say you get your baldness from your mother, so.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And my mother didn't know her parents, so it's a total shot in the dark.
Welcome, everyone. We are drawing close to 7 o'clock. Let me remind you, if you want to chat and ask questions, that you do need to join either via Facebook or YouTube. It is up to you, your choice. If you simply want to watch and you don't want to ask any questions, you can go to newarkupc.info and there click on the live beta card, and that will allow you to watch. You can see the chat and you can also watch. Also mention to you that if you are joining us for the first time, we have a daily broadcast Tuesday through Sunday. And most of them are pre-recorded and then premiered for you. They all start at 7 o'clock, but on Wednesday nights and Friday nights, they are live like this, where you can chat with us and we can take questions and give you answers and have a higher level of interactivity. And so we thank you for being here. This is our first in this new format. Wednesday night, we premiered our first Bible study live. And tonight we're premiering what we call Friday Night with Friends. And we're looking forward to our time with Dr. Peyton. For those of you that did not know he was going to join us, I will introduce him to you shortly. But as folks are gathering in, if you have not joined a small group, you want to do that. And at this COVID-19 era, you've got to be in a small group. It is part of the key. These daily broadcasts are not enough. You need to be able to get into a small group where we meet using WebEx, and you just want to get involved in that. So there's a card there to join.
This is how we're interacting with each other. What we're missing in our regular Sunday services, this is how we're checking in with each other and seeing how everybody's doing week to week. You miss seeing each other face to face. This is how you're going to do it right now. It's on these weekly small group meetings.
That's right. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, you want to make yourself available to that, and I encourage you to do so. So without any further ado, I welcome you to our first Friday Night with Friends, and I welcome Desi, who is my co-host tonight, and we welcome our guest, Dr. Joey Peyton. Now, most of you are familiar with Dr. Peyton. If you're joining us, if you've ever been in service with us, he has preached many, many times. But I want to give you a preview tonight into some other areas of his life. He has had a very colorful life, and I want to do it quickly so we can get out of the way. And so Dr. Peyton has numerous degrees. I'm not going to name them all, but he has studied at the University of Alaska. He's also studied at Wayland Baptist University. Where I met him has he earned, in fact, I think he's the only one who holds both the Masters of Theological Studies and the Master of Divinity from Urshan Graduate School of Theology, and then a Doctorate of Ministry at D-Min from Eden Theological Seminary. Cemetery. That's funny, Peyton, isn't it? Eden Theological Seminary. Sorry about that.
Dr. Peyton, anyway, we're 2 minutes in and he's already throwing digs at Eden. Look at that.
I already threw shade, and I didn't even intend to throw shade. Anyway, graduated from there with an emphasis in practical theology and pastoral care. And his doctoral dissertation there was on providing pastoral care at the time of death. He has also completed, in addition to that, 4 units of clinical pastoral education and 3 doctoral pastoral care fellowships in 2011, 12, and 13, each with an emphasis on something near and dear to us, namely small groups. And as if all of that wasn't enough, Dr. Peyton, glutton for punishment that he is, went back to school for a second doctorate, and he is all but dissertation, ABD, as a PhD candidate from the Assembly of God Theological Seminary in intercultural studies, with an emphasis on providing pastoral care in intercultural settings. And we value his insights from that work as well, as we as a multicultural and diverse congregation work to work together and live together and be in community together. So he's right now in the middle of writing his doctoral dissertation. So his interview tonight is the excuse that he has for why he's not writing, which he should be doing.
Just in case we're not clear on that, he's in the middle of writing his second doctoral dissertation.
That is correct. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm an educated man. I will not be going back for a second doctoral anything. So just making that clear. And his dissertation that he's working on now, his second one, is on providing pastoral care to diaspora populations. In other words, dispersed peoples from around the world that are in places that are not normally their home. They have made it a new home. He's been an ordained United Pentecostal Church minister since 1994, has pastored churches in Illinois, Alaska, and Maine for a total of 20 plus years. And he's also served 4 years as a missionary to the Yupik Eskimos on the Bering Sea of Alaska. He actually could see Russia, unlike Sarah Palin. He's also an Army veteran. Thank you, Joey, for your service to us. Served in the United States Army, also the Alaska National Guard. And his interests are chiefly his wife, Karen, his 5 children, 2 sons-in-laws, 1 daughter-in-law, 12 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. The second commandment, that's a whole nother broadcast. Don't even go there tonight, Joey, or we won't be on time. And teaching and mentoring new ministers of the gospel. So welcome, Joey. We're glad that you're here. You're not a stranger to us, but we're really glad you're here. And so I want to launch us to our first question for you, which is, talk to us a little bit about your medical background. And this is kind of the launch into Alaska, what took you to Alaska, but talk first about some of your medical background and experience, because I don't see that in all of your degrees and your education, and yet you have a fair amount of education and experience in medical field. Talk to us about that.
Well, I began my medical career in the military, where I first trained as an operating room technician and then a combat infantry medic. I served first in the medical field in the military as part of the District of Columbia's nuclear biological response team that was stationed in Fort Meade, Maryland. I then served as a combat medic with the 6th Infantry Division in Fort Richardson, Alaska, or at Fort Richardson, Alaska. And there I became involved with the Alaskan Air National Guard. And when doing that, they required me to get civilian qualifications as well. And I went and got my EMT1, then my EMT2, and then my EMT3, and then EMT instructor. Then I went and got EMT Wilderness instructor, and many other certificates, ATLS, PATLS, and others that allowed me to work in the civilian population as a military medic. I also quite uniquely served in the Army's HIV education and testing team back in the 1980s when HIV was first discovered. I was among the first certified Army HIV counselors and spent many months and actually more than a year testing and counseling people infected with the HIV. During that same time, I began a pre-med degree, or began to compete. Alaska had a program that you could compete for, and once you won it, they would pay your ticket through medical school. So I began to compete for that and go to school. Of course, the more schooling you had, the more education. And so I became part of a pre-med program at the University of Alaska in hopes that they would fund an MD or a nurse practitioner, physician's assistants. After leaving the military in 1988, I went to the mission field of Alaska on the Bering Sea. When I went there, I was an unfunded missionary. So being forced to work, I first received a contract from the state of Alaska to write a book on HIV education for healthcare workers. You gotta understand, this was the frontier for the HIV virus in the 1980s. It was funded by the state of Alaska and was used for many years throughout Alaska. I also began serving during this time frame on the Alaska HIV Education Speakers Bureau and spoke at conferences all across Alaska. I then went to work after completing the book for the Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation as the Director of Emergency Medical Services for the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. I supervised and trained the emergency personnel for 48 clinics, the National Guard, and the Alaskan Scouts. This included clinics, fixed and rotor wing aircrafts, served an area over 300 miles long and 250 miles wide. For a frame of reference, that's roughly the size of the state of Maine. I also covered a significant portion of the Bering Sea. I also taught emergency medical classes during this time frame at the Yukon-Kuskokwim campus at the University of Alaska. When I left Bethel, I took a church in Delta Junction, and while I was there, I continued to teach for the University of Alaska only on their Southeast campus and their Fairbanks campus. And then during the same time, I started my own EMS education and consulting business. I worked also for the Seventh-day Adventist Health Corporation, where I provided emergency cardiac care. I became licensed as an X-ray technician and a phlebotomist, where I provided on-call services to the Seventh-day Adventist Medical Group. I also was an ATLS provider on the local Delta City Ambulance Company. And if that wasn't enough, during the summer, I worked for the Forestry Department, the United States Forestry Service, setting up level 1 fire hospitals at level 1 fires throughout the United States. In fall of 1995 or 1996, I was notified that I had finally been accepted to the Alaska funded training program mentioned above. I was nearing completing my bachelor's in emergency medicine, emergency medical technology, and with an emphasis in emergency medical technology. I was just about finished with that. I was notified that I was accepted into their program, and the continuation of I would be funded. The irony, though, is just a few months later, I was also notified that the program had been discontinued and my grant had been canceled. I did graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Occupational Education from the University of Wayland Baptist University, with an emphasis in emergency medicine. And but at that time, basically, my medical career came to an end. I felt convinced at that time that God wanted me to spend full time in pursuit of religious education and pursuit of ministry. So that kind of a short. There's many small things I could have said. I won't at this time, but that's the thumbnail sketch.
All right. So Dr. Peyton, I have a quick question. How
Yeah.
old were you when they discontinued that program and your medical career kind of wrapped up? How old were you?
About 37, 36.
So I would like it noted to the audience that he was once a young punk that had much to teach others as well. So he could have been kinder to the young punk that had much to teach him. All right. With that said, that's just a side note, little inside joke there between me and Joey. So here's my big question for you, Joey. Talk to us on a serious note. With all of that experience, some of it frontline, some of it dealing with disease that's unknown. HIV in the 80s, for those of you that remember, was a massive disease of unknown. We didn't know how it was transmitted. We didn't know what happened. Talk to us about what you see going on with COVID-19. Just thoughts and opinions. I'm not asking for a medical diagnosis. We're not going to hold you to it. You don't need to go get, insurance to cover your opinions. Just share some thoughts for maybe about 5 minutes of what you think we're in the middle of and what we're dealing with.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that for most of us, the missing piece in understanding COVID-19 is that it is a novel or new virus. On one hand, medicine has understood viruses since their discovery in the 1800s, over 100 years ago. While yes, viruses do have certain predictable characteristics, they also have novel characteristics that are unknown initially. Another thing that makes some viruses more deadly, as in the case of COVID-19, is that they are easily transmittable. So the problem with COVID-19 is both that it is highly transmittable and unknown to science. Remember now, 4 months ago, this virus, though already rapidly spreading throughout the world, was unknown, unheard of, and unidentified. In 4 months, we have identified the virus, begin a search for treatment, and are now testing phase 1 vaccines. This is an unprecedented time frame, and because in the case of HIV and Ebola and most other dangerous viruses, it took years to identify the virus and several more years to develop a treatment. Many older viruses, of which HIV is one, still doesn't have a preventive vaccine. Some previous viruses, they only infected a limited part of the population, and therefore there was no motivation to identify or treat or develop a vaccine. What has made this one difference is that there has been no discrimination in its infection. It has infected the young and the old, the rich, the poor, religious, non-religious, whatever faith, it's infected them all and every other aspect of society. Pandemics, though, are deeply rooted in the history of our world. In my earliest days, personally, in the medical field, were training for that inevitable pandemic that would darken our world again. However, we went a very long time without such a infection. It's been since 1918 that the influenza virus that killed millions at that time, we haven't really had much worldwide pandemic since that time. So in the meantime, we've got lazy. We let our guard down. We let our resources become outdated or depleted. We got overconfident. Not just one, but the whole world. Not just doctors and politicians, but parents, communities, churches. We all went to sleep. It's my opinion that while science will break every speed record and take every risk to understand the virus, expecting a treatment or a vaccine before next year would be foolish, over-optimistic, and extremely dangerous. While we pray and wait for an effective treatment and vaccine, we need to do so with godly patience and thankfulness for the priorities that are currently being given to understand this virus. So my points on the virus would be this. Number one, COVID-19 is a novel virus. So therefore, let us pray that science discovers and understands both a treatment and a vaccine. Number two, we should not join the ranks of those conspiracy hunters and fault finders searching for someone to blame for our collective failure to be prepared for this pandemic. And third, finally, we should not be surprised if a vaccine takes longer than 1 year. Finally, in all of this, my advice would be thus: let the church show love that is patient and kind, love that is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude, a love that does not demand its own way. It's not irritable. It keeps no record of being wrong. Love that does not rejoice in injustice, but rejoices when truth wins. Remember, love never gives up. It never loses faith. It's always hopeful and endures every circumstance.
All right, just so everybody knows, Dr. Peyton knows the questions I'm going to ask him, but I did not coach him on his answers. So I want to be very clear that I really wanted his opinion. I value his preaching. I value his teaching. I value him as a colleague. I value the fact that I had a little part, and it was a little part, in his education. Which education? So many of them. But I really did want to know his opinion in what we're facing here. So bottom line is this is not something to be taken lightly. This is a serious issue we're facing.
75,000 Americans are dead. 75,000. Within a week from now, it'll be over 100,000. That's not to be taken lightly. Absolutely. I personally know people that have died. I personally know many, many people that are suffering. I have friends that have been intubated for the last literally month and a half. It is a very serious disease, and we need to take it serious.
Amen. So in light of that, allow me, if you will, Dr. Peyton, to pivot, given that we're going to take it serious. And if you're a part of the Newark congregation, you already know that we have. I trust that you understand. I trust that we have and will continue to communicate to you about the choices we're making and how we're taking this serious. We're not worried about heaven. We're worried about living this life and being able to be a part of the kingdom. And so I want you all to live. It's as simple as that. So talk to us a little bit. You have some background in education, some experience, and you know about us and our journey. What do you think about, and make this short because I want to get to some stories about Alaska, but what do you think the role of small groups in this season is? What's the importance of it? What's the role?
Well, that's really a huge question and not one that's answered easily, but I'm just going to mention a few things that come immediately to mind.
You didn't expect me to ask you questions that were easy to answer and succinct, did you now?
No, I didn't expect that. The first thing that came to my mind in thinking about this question is that small groups are adaptable. They work literally in any situation. It doesn't matter whether you are in a frozen gulag in Russia or you're imprisoned in China. 2 or 3 people make a small group, and you can easily adapt. You can't do. I know everybody's trying to do church with hundreds of people watching one man or two or three people stand up and sing and one man preach, and that has a place. I'm not trying to criticize that. I'm enjoying some of those as well. But really, as far as the kind of thing that could feasibly replace the interaction is a small group. Obviously, Zoom is designed for 10 to 12 to 15 people at most. Beyond that, it's not effective anymore. The second thing that came to my mind in why small groups in the time of COVID-19 is that it's easier to maintain relationships in small groups. It's tough work. And I could argue that even if you go to a big church and we don't have no virus and we all go to church, and whether you got 200 or 500, you really still only have a small group. Even if your church doesn't do small groups, you have your clique. You hang out with the same 5 or 10 people. Why? Because it takes work to build those kind of relationships. The interesting thing is, in this kind of a time, technology is limiting people to have relationships with a handful of people. So any church more than 25 needs to take it. Another thing that we need so bad as a people is the ability to communicate. Pastor Steve cannot communicate with 200 people, not effectively. And so the small group allows him to communicate to a small group, to a group of small group leaders, and those small group leaders then can communicate to the groups and check on the groups, and therefore people. Another aspect of small groups that is so necessary, and this is true whether we're in COVID-19 or not, and that's pastoral care. Arguably, if all you do is go to church twice a week or 3 times a week and sit with 200, 400, 500 people, you are both not getting any pastoral care and you're not giving any pastoral care. That's a pretty scary proposition. I'm not sure how effectively you can serve God without both giving care and getting care. It also, a small group allows for a platform for teaching and learning, a platform for reflection that is really better than the congregation. The teach one, see one, do one, and then, or the each one, see one, do one, teach one. Those of you that have ever been in education, you've probably heard that. Each one sees one, does one, and then teaches one is much easier in a small group. You can't do that in a large group. And then the last thing I'll mention is small groups provide a place for doing church where you're living. Let me put it this way. It's easier to do church, if you want to say it's doing church, in an artificial atmosphere like a building. Because you could put on the right suit of clothes, you can smell good, you can shave good, you can comb your hair, you can be all pretty and dolled out, you can even control yourself to say the right words for an hour or two, but that's not where you're living. Learning to do church in a small group is doing church where you're living, where your troubles are, where your vulnerabilities are, where your heartaches are, where your disappointments are, where your embarrassments are. We need to learn to do church where we're living. I have never, as a pastor, judged people on how well they come to church. Sometimes that's just an example of how good of a faker or how good of an imitator they are. I want to know how well they're doing church when somebody's dying, when somebody's crying, when somebody's fighting, when somebody, you know the rest. I'll let it go with that. There's many other things I could say about small group. So it's something that's near and dear and passionate in a passion of mine. I think we need more of them. I think churches that had small groups when they started this, when the virus came out, are doing better today and healthy. That's not an academic study, but just from an observation standpoint, churches that already had small groups is doing better than churches who's refused to become involved with small groups. Steve?
I can tell you, Dr. Peyton, that I, as a pastor, cannot tell you how thankful I am that we had this past April, we celebrated 3 years, and I cannot tell you how thankful I am that somebody was listening to God, and I was part of that process, and there were others that we had small groups in place, because I can't even imagine what this would look like. It's been a boatload of work anyway, so I can only imagine what it would look like without the small groups. All right, now the congregation is going to think I just came in with a big old bat to whack them upside the head. And for most of you, I did. I just made a point to you. This is the last part of this week where we've been looking at vulnerability. And if you haven't caught the point, you need to be in a small group. You need to engage in your small group. Stop looking for the sanitized Christianity. Let's do real Christianity, Christianity where you live, and let's get to work on it. So I saved the best for last, though. All right. So the tough stuff we stuck up front. That's kind of my style. Take the bitter pill first, take the sweet stuff second. So Dr. Peyton, tell us a couple of stories that comes from being literally a missionary to a people that, while they're a part of the United States, they are as different from us as anything you can get anywhere in the world. Talk to us about your time with the Yupik Eskimos. Tell us a couple of stories. I have heard folks literally dozens of these stories. They're fascinating. The biggest problem is going to be to get him to tell them short enough and succinct enough that we can leave time for questions and answers. So Dr. Peyton, let me give it to you. Tell us some interesting stories from your time in Alaska.
Well, for tonight, I'll try to center my stories around one idea or one thought, and that was realizing the need for some kind of a portable baptismal tank. My understanding of that evolved over the first couple of years that I was there. Of course, when I first got there, and even before I first got there, I wasn't first thinking about baptisms. I was thinking more about Bible studies and where am I going to have church and those kind of things. But my first story about baptism among the Eskimo people was the night that I was commissioned by the Alaska district of the United Pentecostal Church. There was a group completely unrelated to the United Pentecostal Church at the time, knew nothing about the fact that I was coming as a missionary, actually took their fishing money and chartered a plane because they had got a revelation of the need for baptism. Now, I didn't understand how big this was, but in the land of the Eskimos, due to a couple of things. Number one, water is either very, very cold or it's very, very frozen, and neither one are very conducive to baptism. Well, water is generally warm, well, as you'll see later in the story, not necessarily something you want to baptize in. So they, on their own, got a revelation in a village of Eek, which is right at the mouth of the Kuskokwim River. They got a revelation for the need for baptism, and the group, about 15 of them, chartered a plane and took a plane from Eek, Alaska to Anchorage, Alaska, about 400 miles. They landed there on a Friday morning. They only had a couple days. Their sole purpose of being there was to get baptized. They began to call. To make a long story short, nobody would baptize them. They knew nothing about Jesus' name baptism or anything until they got a hold of District Superintendent James Blackshear. And he immediately knew that this was a God thing. And he said, I'll tell you what, he said, tonight we're commissioning a missionary to come to your area. And if you come tonight, he'll baptize you. And we're going to surprise him with this. And so when I went to the commissioning, I baptized about 15 people that night in Jesus' name. These became the first core group. But I didn't understand the implications of the desperate need for baptism at this, or for water to be baptized at this point. Until I finally got to Bethel about 9 months later, 8-9 months later, I finally got on location. It was then summertime, the next summer, and I was there. And my first baptism there was for a person by the name of Peter Nagaziak. He also had served in the military with me. And so I had a previous history. And once I arrived there, I was able to capitalize on that. He got the Holy Ghost. There was no baptismal tanks, there was no swimming pools, there was no large containers of water, but there was a river. It was July, that was flowing by. The river at Bethel, Alaska is over a mile wide. So I just thought, let's take Peter down to the river. We stepped off into that river. Of course, he just came along like a new convert will, just trusted me to know what's best. And immediately when I stepped off in the water, I knew two things. Number one, I noticed that the water was very cold for July. I later found out that it flows around 36 to 38 degrees in the middle or at the peak of the summer. The other thing I noticed was that it flows very, very fast, between 40 and 45 miles per hour. Difficult to stand up in waist deep water. Well, I baptized Peter Nagaziak there, continued to baptize there until later in that fall. It began to freeze. Didn't really know what I was going to do. Began to realize that I have a problem with baptisms. Need to figure out how to baptize people. But during this time, I got a call to go to Kotlik, Alaska, which is at the mouth of the Yukon River. It was now about December timeframe. I arrived there, began to preach and teach, and gather a group there together and teach them about God. And while I'm teaching them, in the middle of the second day, suddenly through the door bust 5 teenage girls. And I'm not going to try to explain theologically this story. I'm just going to tell you this story is what happened. This is what they said. They said, we were across the creek or across the Yukon River. If you know anything about Kotlik, it's actually built on 3 different pieces of ground separated by rivers or tributaries. But of course, it's frozen. You can run across it. These girls were having a seance before they intended to collectively commit suicide. They wanted to talk to one of their grandmothers before they died to make sure what they were doing was the right thing. And so they were having the seance, and some spirit or something rose up in the midst of this seance and said, go across the river to Peter's house. Again, not the same Peter, but a different Peter, very common name among the Eskimos. Peter, a eunuch, I believe is his last name. And there'll be a man there that'll tell you what to do. Well, they were scared. They were petrified. They ran over there. I was there. I began to tell them, talk to them about repentance. They wanted to repent. Then I told them about baptism without thinking. There is no water here that's not frozen. Now, you can thaw enough water to drink, but it's really difficult at 40 below zero to thaw enough water to baptize people in. So immediately after telling them about baptism, they wanted to be baptized. Well, there was 5 of them. This may sound ironic, but I talked 3 of them out of getting baptized. I really tried hard to talk all 5 out of getting baptized, but I would come back. Well, no, they didn't want me to come back. I wanted to get baptized right now. And so somebody had the bright idea, why don't we take them down to the watering hole in the Yukon River where we have an axe. We chop the ice open every morning so that people can bail their water out. We'll go down there and chop a hole in the ice. It's about 3 foot thick at this time of the year. And you can baptize them in the Yukon River. Well, young and dumb I did have a pilot with me, and I told him we tied a rope around my waist, and I stepped off into that ice hole. It was about 35 below zero outside. I was instantly in hypothermia, instantly numb. There was no preliminaries. There was no, by the authority of the word of God and my commissioned or ordained as a minister of God and the authority of whatever. No, buddy, I turned and grabbed those 2 girls and stuck them under that water and pulled them out. By the time I baptized 2, it probably took about 10 to 15 seconds. I was already too cold to get out of the water by myself. They took me out of that water, had to transport me to the nearest building and rewarm me up. But if I wasn't aware by then that we needed a solution, I knew then. Well, back in Bethel, where our headquarters church was, we were desperately in need of a new building, and that's a story for another time. We finally got a new building. God gave us a $200,000 building for a very small amount. We literally, for probably around $40,000 to $45,000, got this new building, and it was in the industrial part of Bethel where there was factories and stuff. So we weren't going to bother people by having church and stuff all night long, and so we got it, man. We're going to have church, man. We opened up that warehouse. I discovered the very first day that I was over there looking at it that right next to the church was this relatively not so cold stream that was flowing by the church. And I thought, how convenient. This is not near as cold. I thought this is flowing in off the Delta, and it's not cold like the Kuskokwim is, and therefore, man, our first church, we were packed out, probably at 150 people there, and we were just, man, I started preaching baptism. I wanted to baptize somebody in that creek so bad. And right in the middle of the service, I've had this inspiration of faith, and I just said, if you're interested in getting baptized, follow me down to the river. Well, I walked down to the river, down to that creek next to the church, right, waded right out of the water and turned around immediately. Cars were stopping on the road that was right there. There was a bridge right there, and people stopped, and the crowd very quickly grew from 150 to 200 to 250 probably or more. And people started coming out, and then I started baptizing people. Man, this was the greatest day of my ministry, one after another. I baptized a Moravian minister, pastor, his wife. Other people just came. Man, it was powerful. It was great. About the 14th or 15th person down into the water was a very sophisticated, very well-known lady, educated lady. She came wading down. Her father was the Moravian pastor. And she said, Brother Peyton, she said, you've convinced me of this Jesus name baptism. And if this is good enough for my father, it's good enough for me. So I want you to baptize me. But she said, maybe you should know that you're baptizing people in the sewage lagoon. Once again, I realized that, wow, we needed some other way to baptize people. Well, I had a dream about a baptismal tank. We won't go into detail about it, but it really was almost seemed impossible. It looked like a baby crib with a plastic sheet liner, and we were able to baptize. God gave me a dream about it. I immediately built it. Immediately, actually, while I was testing it the first time, somebody knocked on the door from the village of Kotlik, and man, I was able to baptize her. I returned to the village of Kotlik about a week later with this baptismal tank, and there I baptized more than a dozen people. One was a denominational pastor in the village of Kotlik, and many other important people in that town. Quite an experience. So that's my baptismal stories. I'm hard to get through to. I should have caught it when I was that 15 people would be desperate enough to fly to Anchorage at the cost of thousands of dollars just to get baptized. But no, that wasn't enough. And then the swift water of Peter and the Gazette didn't teach me, and the frozen pond, even though that was getting pretty desperate at that point, it took a sewage lagoon. And thankfully, maybe a sewage lagoon is a good place for our sins, but probably not for our health. Thankfully, nobody got sick. But for many months after that, even years after that, I was teased by the residents of Bethel about baptizing people in the sewage lagoon. We did get this portable baptismal tank. It was collapsible down. It could go into a 5-gallon bucket. It could then be put together, kind of like Lincoln Logs type of an idea. And I baptized well over 100 people in that tank. And I could tell you many more very serious and funny stories about baptizing in that tank, but we'll save those for another day.
So you're telling me, Dr. Peyton, that those who come up and they see a bug floating in the baptistry and want to know why it hasn't been cleaned, they really need to get their priorities straight, because this lady's getting baptized in the sewer stream. Yeah.
Context. It's all about context, right?
It's all about context. It is. And, it's really was hard to come back from the mission field, or from that particular mission field, and be patient with westernized Americans. When you see people come to church on a snowmobile at 65 below zero, and then some people can't come to go to church because it's raining, it's very, very frustrating. And it's very hard to adjust back to Western society. But they were a hungry people, and they're still hungry people. Great revival still going on in Western Alaska to this day. And I'm thankful for that. And have had a small part of its beginning.
Yeah, I've told the church this, that they have to give me time to acclimate, because whenever I go to Africa, when I come back, I am not a very good pastor, because I have absolutely no patience for their pain and suffering, because the comparison, there's no pain and suffering. So I'm not a good pastor for at least several weeks until I reacclimate, because I just don't have the patience because of the contrast. We have it so easy here in North America.
The good thing about the Eskimo people was there are no roads between the lands of the Eskimos and the lands of the rest of the world. There's only one way to get there, and that's to fly. You can't even boat there. You can take a barge, but it takes almost a year for a barge to get there. So you could take a big ship from Japan. We got ships in there from Japan, but there's just no way other than flying. So you don't have to worry about people going to another church or to a convention or something and saying, wow, they do it different there. So very quickly we developed our own customs, and we had church literally sometimes all night, sometimes for several days. And, and I'd have Westerners come, friends of mine would come out to see what was going on, and they would say, why don't you tell them? Why would I tell them? If they want to have church, you tell them. I mean, there were times that we would have church, and I would preach till I was exhausted. Then I would fall asleep on the pew or on the floor in the corner, and I would sleep 4 or 5 hours while church continued, and then wake up and preach again. And my wife is here, and she's listened to this broadcast, and others that were there can testify to that effect. It was not uncommon. We had church for over a year. We had church every night, and it wasn't because I wanted to. In fact, I tried to not have church, but it came very quickly. If I didn't show up for church, they were. And so
I suspect they did not have all the distractions that we find ourselves with too.
There was no movie theaters. The only thing that they had for entertainment really was television. And television and alcohol. And the two were a bad combination, leading to one of the major social ills in that part of the world is suicide. And I believe it was a direct product of those two items. But so they had there was no, very, very few other things to do. And so, church was a form of entertainment. It was also, they like to come to our church because I encourage spiritualism. Now, don't take that in the wrong context, but understand that missionaries, non-Pentecostal missionaries, had tried to stop their inclination towards spiritual type worship. They were forbidden to use their drums, their dances, here comes this white skinny preacher who says, go home and get your drums. Let's all dance. Let's all do a dance, and so the things that they had been actually forbidden by missionaries for over 100 years, I come incorporating them as part of what I was doing. And I mean, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether that's right, but that's very much part of Pentecostal culture is drums. And once I realized they liked it, man, I started pushing it. They like to dance, they like the drums, they like to worship. And you know what? God seemed to like it because he was sure filling a lot of people with the Holy Ghost and doing a lot of miracles. And so, you talk about playing. I mean, church was a playground. And
it's amazing what happens when you don't know you can't do something, huh?
That's exactly right. And I mean, I personally saw blind eyes open, deaf ears stopped, people that had not walked for decades walked. I've laid my hands on tumors as big as a grapefruit and have them disappear under my hand. And it was not because of my westernized faith. I guarantee you, it was because they believed. They strongly believed, and because they did, God honored it. And God honored the simplicity of their faith.
All right, folks, if
So-
you've got questions, start typing them in. Help us out by prefacing your question with the word question. And so Desi, I'm looking over. I'm thinking I'll take an easy one. Scott wants to know, Dr. Peyton.
I was going to
You
start
ever-
with that one too.
Yeah, well, why don't you go ahead and read it then, Desi?
Okay, so we have someone watching you online, Dr. Peyton. Scott Lucas wants to know, have you ever considered writing a book to chronicle these stories? It's an amazing testimonies that you're just sharing in this little hour. Now, I'm a former student of Dr. Peyton, so is my wife, Rachel. So I know many more stories that I've had the pleasure of hearing over the years from him when I was a former student of his, and then our friendship that continued after school as he's eaten in our home multiple times. And I agree. At what point are you going to chronicle this so it's preserved?
Well, I have started. Of course, I started writing a book when I was there and have worked on it as far as about stories, some of the stories that I told tonight. In fact, I refreshed my memory by going back and reading some of the things that I wrote back then. For me, there's two reasons why I have not yet. I am a huge opponent of revisionist history. And what I mean by that is the way we tell history is we just tell all the good points. And I'm not going to write a book that just tells all the good points. I'm going to, when I publish a book, if I publish a book that is a narrative of some of my stories, it will include both the good points and the bad points.
So you're going to include the sewer baptisms along with the good baptisms.
But I'm going to include things like I can't tell my stories without telling the story of
other people.
My first marriage. I'll just throw myself, talking about vulnerability, under the bus. And for those that are concerned about that, she's been dead now for 20 years. So regardless of your theology, I'm okay. So just take a deep breath. But but I can't tell my stories without telling you that at the same time, all of these stories were going on. I was going through the worst life you can imagine. Because it's not fair to the story to just tell you the miracles.
There's a lot of valleys in there too.
Yes, and I would argue that I have the miracle stories because of the valleys. They were not because of the high points. The miracles were the results of the valleys. The times that I spent the night on my face in the carpet crying out to God in my misery. That's what produced the revivals. And understanding that is just not fair. Plus, I don't want to hurt anybody. So I don't know if somebody knows how to write history without hurting people, true history. I'm not talking about, everything's wonderful and we all just sat around and ate apple pie and did miracles type of history. But no, the hell as well as the miracles, the doubts as well as the faith, the embarrassing parts. And so, I mean, I've thought about and I actually have a book written that's got isolated stories. I'm not happy with those isolated stories because
maybe Dr. Peyton, what you should do is write it, find somebody trustworthy and let it sit in a vault for say 50 years or whatever time frame you feel is comfortable, and then publish it. it's ironic as you're talking about the story in this way. And of course, folks, I've heard many a story as well, as I have started as a professor in Dr. Peyton's life, but then became a colleague, and now he's a dear friend. And I don't know how we're dear friends. I have no idea, because we are two very different people and yet many things in common. But it's interesting because I just secured this today, our guest tomorrow night. Do you all want to know who's coming next Friday? Should I keep it a secret? All right, come on. I need to see clickety clack on the keys here. Do you want me to tell you? Or do you want me to hold
let
it?
people be surprised.
Do you want to hold it in? Is that what you want to do, Desi? Well, let's just put it this way.
That's my vote. But
all right,
let people
I'll let
respond,
it out
see what they do.
without telling you exactly who it is. But our guest next Friday night is actually going to address the topic of the theology of suffering, where suffering
That's
and
a better way to do it.
sacrifice. How does God use theology? How does God use sacrifice and suffering to do his will? I want to be triumphant as a servant of God, which means I don't have suffering and I don't have sacrifice. And unfortunately, I think Dr. Peyton, you would agree with this. That's not the story of how God does his work. He actually uses suffering. He uses sacrifice to do the greatest miracles. And it's quite irritating, honestly.
And my biggest fear is that when we write books, and I could name a dozen books right now, they're on the top of my head, that are part of our history, a history that I love, but I've often read those stories.
It's part of the story.
I've read their stories and I've thought I could never be that good.
Yeah.
Now, some of them, I also know them. And off the record, they've told me about the suffering, and they told me about the valleys, and they told me about the pain. But the book doesn't tell that. So readers read our revised history and say, I can't serve God like that.
Right.
That person looks perfect. And to me, I'm fearful. I'm really fearful that a revised history does more damage to the kingdom than it does help, because it creates an environment where people cannot see how they could ever be that good.
And if we're not careful, the wrong characters in the story get glory when you when you share a story that only has the high points.
All right, Desi, where are we going next? What question you want to take?
Well, we've got a few other questions that were in here, and so we can either let's continue down this road. You mentioned baptism, and so Leela Cooper asked, do you know that there's a baptism solution in place in these communities now in Alaska? So you're talking about when you were a missionary there 20 plus years ago, and how you had to come to an understanding that water's not readily available to baptize people the way we take it for granted here. So is there a more permanent solution in place now, or
yes, well,
it's still a struggle?
There's a two-part solution that is well established now. And I just did some research today, but there are 3, 4, 5 United Pentecostal churches now in the land I once was. And I'm not talking about small churches. I'm talking about, these are established churches with buildings and baptismal
among the Yupik people.
Right, correct. Some of them pastored by Yupiks themselves, and some pastored by outsiders. So that's obviously one solution. You can take them, they don't have to go to Anchorage, they can go to Bethel. So if you're in Eek, that's just 80 miles. It's not 480 miles. It's a $100 ticket, not an $800 ticket. So that's one solution. The other solution that I was looking at today, and actually I was looking at a video, Christmas for Christ video from I can't remember, I think Nunavik church, UPC church. He was on the film strip, or not the film strip, but the Christmas for Christ film here a couple of years ago, and he was using a product that I actually went and looked online at today that is actually very similar to what I made, but it's metal.
As a portable baptistry?
It's a portable. It has a pre-made lining, so it's not just a plastic tarp as I used, but it's and it's got a metal frame. Obviously, I used a wood frame, but a metal frame I could see, and therefore it doesn't need quite so much of the dowels type crib stuff that I made before. Plus, because the liner is one piece and it's sewed corners, the water kind of holds itself. So it kind of, whereas mine was just a flat sheet that was tucked down in there. No way it would hold water without a frame. This would actually hold water as long as nobody stepped on the side. It would hold water, but then the metal frame allows you to have a side that you can hold on to when you get in. So yeah, it collapses to a very small. You gotta understand the missionary planes. Both we had a missionary plane, and several of the churches there do now. Their planes are small, what we call a 2.5 seater. So, two big adults or two smaller adults with a child-sized adult can fly in them, or two adults and a baptismal tank the size of a 5-gallon bucket. So these collapse down, and so they're being used by. In fact, there's several pictures online that you can look at to see these baptismal tanks. And so there is a permanent solution now, and I thank God for that. Obviously, when I was there, nobody baptized when I was there by immersion, or they just didn't. Of course, very few churches in the world believe in the essentialness of baptism. Many churches baptize; they just don't believe it's essential. If it's not essential,
as in part of the salvation process. For those,
and if it's not essential,
not
and it's
familiar with those
below,
terms.
If it's not essential and it's 60 below, you tend to avoid it. When it's 60 below, you only do what's essential. So,
Dr. Peyton, you can't see the chat. Viv Emereso from Australia mentions that they have a portable baptismal that they use at a daughter work in Kilcoy, a canoe. That's kind of cool.
I heard that from Kim when she was in my class.
Yeah.
When we were talking about it at that point. We've thought of different things while we were there. I tried to get one guy to empty his freezer. He had a full of meat. I said, I bet that freezer will hold water. And he wouldn't empty the freezer. So we had to come up with a different solution.
All right, Desi, we got time for maybe one or two more quick questions. We do want to be conscious of time.
Well,
the audience has been great, and we don't want to overstay our welcome. So where do we want to go next?
I don't know that we even have time for one or two. Honestly, Stephen, we got 1 minute. So I will close out with one minor question. I suspect that this is a very, very personal question, but since we're doing this live and you can't really deny it, Dr. Peyton, we have a guest on tonight. And this guest, somebody by the name of Jody. Jody wants to know, when are you coming back to visit your sister?
I was just there 4 months ago, so 5 months ago. And
I'm guessing there's probably a family relationship here.
Yes,
huh?
That's my sister. That's my younger. Both my sisters are younger than me, and
everybody's younger than you, right, Peyton?
No, I got two older brothers.
Well, I was pretty sure, I wasn't going to say this, but in the chat, it says Jody Peyton Tanner. So I was pretty sure this was a family relative. But Jody, we're glad you could be with us tonight, even if it was just to see the interview with your brother. So notice, Jody, he didn't answer the question. He just said, I was there 4 months ago.
I don't know what's happening in the world.
All right, folks. Well, we are right at 7:59. So let me say to all of you, thank you so much for being with us. If you are a part of our congregation, thank you for being with us for our inaugural Friday night with friends. We will be doing this every Friday night, our daily broadcast. We do not broadcast on Monday. We take a Sabbath, 1 day off, but Tuesday through Sunday, we broadcast every night, 7 p.m. on Wednesday nights for 1 hour, on Friday nights for 1 hour. And Wednesdays and Fridays are live. Again, all this information you can find at our church website, newarkupc.info. And as I have taken to saying to all of you, thank you, Dr. Peyton, for being with us. Thank you, Desi, for helping me co-host. And until we see you again tomorrow night, I say to all of you, good night.
Thank you for having me. Hi to all my family.
Thank you,
Hi,
folks, for
Mom.
joining. And your daughters, they're watching too.
Yes, to my daughters, my mom, everybody that's out there. God
Good
bless
night,
you all.
everyone.